The evening sun cast long shadows across the polished exterior of the Grand Plaza Hotel as a modest Tesla Model 3 pulled into the circular driveway. Behind the wheel sat the hotel chain's owner, though no one would have guessed it from his appearance. He wore comfortable dark jeans, a navy sweater, and carried a simple leather backpack, a far cry from the power suits that filled his closet back home. He liked doing these surprise visits to his properties. It gave him a real sense of how things actually ran when no one was expecting the boss. Plus, after 15 years of building his hospitality empire from scratch, he still couldn't shake the hands-on mindset that got him here in the first place. The valet attendant barely glanced his way as he stepped out of his car, choosing instead to rush toward a gleaming Rolls-Royce that had just arrived. A small smile crossed his face. He'd have to make a note about that in his inspection report. Customer service should never depend on the price tag of someone's vehicle. As he pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby, the familiar scent of vanilla and cedar, the signature fragrance he'd chosen himself for all his hotels, greeted him. The space buzzed with early evening activity, business travelers wheeling sleek suitcases across marble floors, tourists gathering around their guides, and staff members moving purposefully in their crisp uniforms. But something felt off. He'd done enough of these surprise visits to recognize when the atmosphere shifted. It started with whispers. A bellhop nudged his colleague, nodding in his direction. A group of guests at the check-in desk turned to stare, their expressions a mix of concern and suspicion. Even the elderly couple sitting in the plush armchairs by the fireplace stopped their conversation to watch him. He'd experienced this before, of course. As a black man who'd climbed to the top of an industry that didn't see many people who looked like him in leadership positions, he was used to being underestimated, questioned, and viewed with suspicion. It was partly why he'd started doing these incognito visits, to see how his staff treated people when they didn't know they were being watched. Walking deeper into the lobby, he took mental notes of everything around him. The fresh flowers in the crystal vases needed replacing. They were a day past their prime. A ceiling light above the concierge desk flickered slightly. The morning newspaper still sat in its rack, though it was now early evening. Small details, but in the luxury hotel business, details mattered. He moved toward the elevator banks, planning to start his inspection on the top floor and work his way down. That's when he noticed the security guard. The man had been tracking his movements since he entered, speaking quietly into his radio while maintaining what he probably thought was subtle surveillance. For a moment, he considered pulling out his ID, revealing who he was, and ending what he knew was coming. But years of experience had taught him valuable lessons about these situations. Sometimes, the only way to fix a problem was to let it play out, to expose the ugly truth so it could be addressed head-on. So he continued his walk, pretending not to notice the growing tension around him. He pulled out his phone, checking the latest occupancy reports for this location while he waited for the inevitable confrontation. The numbers looked good, 92% capacity for the month, higher than projected. The click of dress shoes on marble grew louder behind him. More than one person approaching. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and prepared himself for what was about to unfold. This wasn't the first time he'd faced a situation like this, and sadly he knew it probably wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just another guest being profiled. This time, he owned the place. And maybe, just maybe, what was about to happen could lead to real change. Not just in this hotel, but across his entire chain. Sometimes the best lessons came from the most uncomfortable moments. He turned around slowly, facing the approaching footsteps, his expression neutral but alert. The security guard's hand rested near his weapon, and beside him, the front desk manager's face wore a mask of stern authority. Neither of them had any idea they were about to learn a valuable lesson about assumptions, one that would transform not just their careers, but the entire culture of the Grand Plaza hotel chain. The tension in the lobby could have been cut with a knife. The security guard, a tall man with graying temples, stepped forward first. "Sir, I'm going to need you to explain your presence here," he said, his voice carrying across the marble floor loud enough to draw even more attention from nearby guests. The hotel owner maintained his composure, though his heart rate picked up slightly. He built his empire on staying level-headed in tough situations. "I'm just looking around," he replied calmly, his voice steady and professional. Is there a problem? The front desk manager, a woman in her mid-40s wearing a perfectly pressed blue suit, crossed her arms. We've had reports of suspicious activity on the upper floors, she said, emphasizing the word suspicious in a way that made her meaning clear. Several guests have expressed concern about someone who doesn't appear to be a registered guest wandering the premises. He noticed how she carefully chose her words, trying to maintain a veneer of professionalism while making accusations. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd personally approved the training manual she was supposed to follow for guest interactions. I understand your concern, he said, reaching slowly for his phone. Would you like me to? Sir, keep your hands where we can see them, the security guard interrupted, his hand still hovering near his weapon. The command echoed through the lobby, causing several guests to pull out their phones, some beginning to record the scene. A young couple nearby gathered their children closer, while an elderly man at the coffee shop shook his head in disapproval, though it wasn't clear toward whom. The owner could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, judging, assuming, deciding his guilt or innocence based on nothing but appearance. I'm simply trying to show you, he began again, his voice still calm despite the growing knot in his stomach. Years of dealing with prejudice had taught him that losing his cool would only make things worse. The manager cut him off. Sir, if you're not a guest here, you need to leave immediately. This is a private property, and we reserve the right to refuse access to anyone who poses a security concern. He almost laughed at that. He'd written that policy himself, intended to protect guests from actual threats, not to be used as a tool for profiling. Instead, he took a deep breath. I have every right to be here, he stated firmly. Then you won't mind providing proof of that, the security guard challenged, moving closer. Are you a registered guest? Which room are you staying in? The owner looked around the lobby, his lobby, taking in the expensive artwork he'd personally selected, the custom furniture he'd commissioned, even the marble flooring imported from Italy that he'd spent weeks choosing. Every detail of this place bore his fingerprints, yet here he stood, being treated like an intruder. I'm not a guest, he said finally, watching their expressions harden. I'm actually. That's all we need to hear, the manager interrupted, pulling out her phone. I'm calling the police. We've had several thefts reported recently, and your behavior matches the pattern we're watching for. The absurdity of the situation struck him again. The thefts she mentioned. He'd received the reports himself just that morning. 3 guests had reported missing items over the past week, leading him to make this surprise inspection in the first place. He could see his reflection in the polished marble floor, his casual clothes chosen specifically for this unannounced visit now being used as evidence against him. The same outfit that helped him blend in at his other properties to observe genuine customer service was now marking him as suspicious. The crowd in the lobby had grown larger, with more phones recording the scene. Some people whispered among themselves, while others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. It was a microcosm of society itself, the accusers, the observers, the silent witnesses. But everything was about to change. He could hear familiar footsteps approaching from behind, the click of heels on marble moving at a rapid pace. His assistant, who'd been parking their rental car, was about to turn this situation on its head. He almost felt sorry for the manager and security guard. Almost. As his assistant's voice rang out across the lobby, he kept his eyes fixed on the 2 people in front of him, watching as their faces began the journey from righteous suspicion to dawning horror. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful lessons come wrapped in moments of profound embarrassment. The atmosphere in the lobby had transformed from tense to electric. His assistant's voice still echoed off the marble walls, the words hanging in the air like thunder after lightning. That's the owner of the entire hotel chain. For a moment, nobody moved. The security guard's hand slowly dropped from his weapon, and the manager's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering on the floor. The sound seemed to break the spell of silence that had fallen over the lobby. The owner stood perfectly still, his expression unchanged, though inside his mind raced through 15 years of similar moments. Times when he'd been followed in his own hotels, questioned at business meetings, or asked to prove he belonged in first-class lounges. But this time felt different. This time, he had the power to create real change. His assistant, a woman who'd worked with him for 8 years and had seen countless instances of discrimination, moved to stand beside him. She pulled out a folder containing his ID and company credentials, but he raised his hand slightly, stopping her. This moment needed to play out differently. "Before you see those papers," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby, "I want everyone here to take a good look around." He gestured to the space surrounding them. "What do you see?" The manager and security guard exchanged confused glances, while the crowd of onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Some had lowered their phones, but others continued recording, sensing that something important was unfolding. "I see imported marble floors that took 3 months to install," he continued, his shoes tapping against the gleaming surface as he took a step forward. "I see hand-selected artwork from local artists because I believe every hotel should reflect its community." He pointed to a striking painting on the wall. "That piece there." "I met the artist at a small gallery downtown. She was just starting out, and now her work hangs in every Grand Plaza hotel worldwide." He walked over to the front desk, running his hand along the polished wood. "This desk is made from reclaimed timber from an old Chicago warehouse. I chose it because it tells a story, just like every piece in this building tells a story." The manager's face had lost all color, and the security guard looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. But the owner wasn't finished. This wasn't about humiliation, it was about education. "I've built this chain from the ground up," he continued, his voice firm but not unkind. "Every detail, from the signature scent in the air to the thread count of the sheets upstairs, has my fingerprints on it. And yet," he paused, letting the moment sink in, "and yet, the moment I walk through these doors dressed casually, I'm assumed to be a threat." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people looked away in shame, recognizing their own quick judgments. Others nodded slowly, understanding the deeper message in his words. "The police are probably already on their way," he said, turning back to the manager and security guard. "Let them come. In fact, I want them to come. Because this isn't just about me anymore. This is about every person who's ever been judged based on their appearance rather than their character." His assistant stepped forward again, this time with a different folder, one containing the latest security reports he'd been reviewing earlier. "Those thefts you mentioned," he said, accepting the folder. "I came here today specifically to address them. I've been visiting all our properties, working to implement new security measures, but not the kind of security that profiles guests based on how they look." The sound of police sirens grew closer outside. The owner straightened his posture, adjusted his casual sweater, and smiled slightly. "When they arrive," he said to the still-stunned manager and security guard, "we're all going to have a very interesting conversation about what real security looks like. And tomorrow?" He paused, making eye contact with each of them. "Tomorrow, we begin making some major changes in how this hotel, how this entire chain, operates." The front doors opened, and 2 police officers entered, taking in the scene before them. The owner turned to greet them, his demeanor completely calm. This confrontation was about to become a teaching moment that would reshape not just one hotel, but an entire company's culture. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful changes start with the most uncomfortable moments. The police officers stood in the lobby, taking in the unusual scene before them. The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, their phones still recording every moment. The front desk manager looked like she might faint, while the security guard seemed to have aged 10 years in the past few minutes. "Officers," the owner said, stepping forward with the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding rooms much larger than this lobby. "I believe I'm the person you were called about." He gestured to his assistant, who now held both his identification and company credentials. The older of the 2 officers, a sergeant with salt and pepper hair, reviewed the documents carefully. His eyes widened slightly as he realized exactly who was standing in front of him. "Sir," he said, his tone shifting from professional concern to embarrassment, "I apologize for the disturbance." "No need to apologize," the owner replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "In fact, I'm glad you're here. We're about to have a very important conversation about security, profiling, and how we can do better." He turned to address the crowd. "Everyone in this lobby right now is witnessing something significant. This isn't just about me being mistaken for a thief in my own hotel. It's about the assumptions we all make every single day." The younger police officer was quickly catching up to the situation, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The owner noticed this and smiled warmly. "Officer, your discomfort is actually a good thing. It means you understand that something went wrong here. That's where change begins." He walked over to the front desk, where the manager was still frozen in place. "Let's all move this conversation somewhere more private," he suggested, but then paused and addressed the crowd again. "But before we do, I want to say something to everyone watching and recording this moment." The phones remained up, capturing his every word. "I could have prevented this entire situation by dressing differently or immediately showing my ID. I could have gotten angry or defensive. Instead, I let it play out because these moments, these uncomfortable, difficult moments, are how we learn and grow." The owner picked up one of the hotel's business cards from the front desk. "Tomorrow, this incident will probably be all over social media. People will be calling for folks to lose their jobs. They'll be angry, and honestly, they have every right to be. But I want everyone here to think about something. How many times have you made a quick judgment about someone based on how they looked? How many times have you crossed the street, clutched your bag tighter, or made an assumption about someone's education, wealth, or character based on their appearance?" The lobby was silent now, phones still recording, but their owners fully engaged in his words. Even the hotel staff who had gathered at the edges of the scene were listening intently. "What happened here today isn't unique," he continued. "It happens every day in hotels, stores, and streets across the country. The only difference is that today, it happened to someone with the power to do something about it." He turned to his assistant. "Please contact our corporate office. I want our entire executive team here tomorrow morning." The police sergeant cleared his throat. "Sir, do you want to file any sort of complaint?" The owner shook his head. "What I want is to use this moment to create real change." He looked at the manager and security guard. "You two, along with the officers here, are going to help me design a new training program. One that addresses the root causes of what happened today, not just the symptoms." His phone buzzed. Corporate executives were already calling, likely having heard about the incident through social media. He ignored it for now. Some things were more important than damage control. "Everyone involved in what happened here today will have a choice," he announced. "You can let this be a moment of shame and regret, or you can help make it a moment of transformation. I'm choosing transformation." He looked directly at the manager and security guard. "What about you?" The weight of his words hung in the air. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but their phones had captured everything. By morning, this incident would be viewed by millions, but it wouldn't play out like similar viral videos. This one would be different because its ending wouldn't be about punishment, it would be about progress. The owner gestured toward the hotel's conference room. "Shall we begin?" he asked the still stunned group of staff and officers. As they walked away from the lobby, he could hear the murmur of conversations starting among the remaining guests and staff. Seeds of change were being planted, and he intended to make sure they grew into something meaningful. The next morning, the hotel's largest conference room buzzed with nervous energy. The executive team had flown in overnight, their usual polished appearances slightly rumpled from hasty travel. The front desk manager and security guard sat quietly at one end of the long table, looking like they hadn't slept at all. The two police officers from the previous night's incident had also returned, having been personally invited by the owner. News of the incident had spread exactly as predicted. Social media was ablaze with video clips from multiple angles, each showing the confrontation and its surprising resolution. Major news networks had already requested interviews, and the hotel's phone lines were ringing nonstop, with reporters seeking comments. The owner walked into the room wearing one of his usual business suits today, the contrast with yesterday's casual attire not lost on anyone present. He carried a thick folder of documents and set them on the conference table. "Before we begin," he said, looking around the room, "I want to make something clear. This meeting isn't about punishment or public relations. It's about honest conversation and real change." He opened the folder and pulled out several papers. "These are resignation letters. The media is demanding them, social media is screaming for them, and our PR team strongly recommends them." The manager and security guard seemed to shrink in their chairs. But then the owner did something unexpected. He tore the letters in half. "That's the easy way out," he said, letting the torn papers fall onto the table. "Fire a few people, make a public apology. donate to some charities, and wait for the news cycle to move on. But nothing really changes, does it? He pulled out another document, this one much thicker. This is something different. This is a draft of what I spent all night working on, a complete overhaul of our company's training and security protocols. Walking around the table, he continued, yesterday, I was treated like a criminal in my own hotel. But here's the thing, I'm not special. The only difference between me and countless others who face this kind of profiling is that I own the building. I have the power to do something about it. And that's exactly what we're going to do. The executive team shifted uncomfortably in their seats as he pulled up security footage from various hotels in their chain. In the past year alone, we've had 37 reported incidents of racial profiling across our properties. Those are just the ones that were reported. How many guests simply walked away, never to return? He gestured to the police officers. Our friends from law enforcement are here because they deal with these situations every day. They're going to help us understand how to maintain security without compromising dignity. The younger officer spoke up, his voice steady despite his nervousness. Most calls we receive about suspicious persons turn out to be nothing more than someone making assumptions based on appearance. It wastes our time and resources, and more importantly, it damages community trust. The owner nodded. Exactly. And that's why everyone in this room is going to help design a new approach. He turned to the manager and security guard. You two made mistakes yesterday, but you're not bad people. You're products of a system that we built, a system that needs to change. He pulled out his phone and showed them the latest viral video numbers. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. People are angry, and they have every right to be. But we have a choice in how we respond to that anger. We can hide behind PR statements and token gestures, or we can do something revolutionary. The owner outlined his plan, a complete redesign of their hiring practices, training programs, and security protocols. Every employee, from housekeeping to executive level, would undergo new bias training. Security procedures would be standardized and regularly audited. Anonymous reporting systems would be implemented for both guests and staff. But here's the most important part, he said, reaching the end of his presentation. We're going to be completely transparent about this process. The mistakes, the struggles, the successes, all of it. We're going to show the world what real institutional change looks like. He looked directly at the manager and security guard. Are you willing to be part of this? To share your story, to help others learn from your experience? It won't be easy. You'll face criticism, judgment, maybe even harassment. But you'll also be part of something important. The room fell silent as everyone processed his words. The executive team exchanged glances, already calculating the costs and risks. The police officers nodded approvingly. Finally, the security guard spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. I want to help make this right. The manager nodded in agreement, tears in her eyes. Me too, whatever it takes. The owner smiled for the first time that morning. Then let's get to work. We have a lot to do, and the whole world is watching. Let's show them what real change looks like. 3 months after the incident, the Grand Plaza Hotel in Chicago had become more than just a luxury accommodation. It was now a living laboratory for change. The lobby where everything had started looked the same on the surface, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The security guard who had confronted the owner now stood at his usual post, but with a different presence. He wore a new type of uniform, designed with input from community leaders to appear more approachable while maintaining professionalism. A small camera on his lapel served as a reminder of accountability, but more importantly, as a tool for training future staff. Tell them what happened last week, the owner said to the guard, speaking to a group of new employees during their orientation. The guard smiled and stepped forward, his previous shame transformed into purpose. A guest came in wearing sweatpants and carrying a backpack. He began, his voice confident. Old me would have immediately flagged him as suspicious. Instead, I greeted him warmly, just like we do with everyone now. Turns out he was a tech billionaire who ended up booking our entire top floor for a conference next month. The owner nodded, then gestured to the front desk manager, who had also become an unexpected agent of change. She stepped forward, her posture reflecting the confidence that comes from personal growth. We've completely redesigned our guest interaction protocols, she explained to the group. Every decision we make now goes through what we call the mirror test. Would we treat our own reflection the same way we're about to treat this guest? The changes weren't just superficial. Every department had been transformed from the ground up. The housekeeping staff now had direct lines of communication to management. The valet team had been retrained to provide the same level of service regardless of the vehicle or the driver. Even the hiring process had been overhauled to ensure diversity at every level of the organization. The owner walked the new employees through the lobby, pointing out subtle but significant changes. "See that seating area?" he said, indicating the plush chairs near the fireplace. "We rearranged it to be more open, more welcoming. No more hidden corners where people feel watched or isolated." He stopped at the front desk, running his hand along the same polished wood he had touched the night of the incident. "Every employee now has the authority to make things right if they see something wrong. There's no more 'let me check with my manager' when it comes to treating people with dignity." The hotel had become a case study in corporate transformation. Business schools were already writing about their approach. Other hotel chains had reached out, asking for guidance in implementing similar changes. But the owner insisted on keeping the focus local and personal. "The real test isn't in the policies we write," he told the group, gesturing to a wall where guest comments were now prominently displayed. "It's in the stories we hear every day." He pointed to one comment card in particular. It was from a young black businessman who had written about arriving late at night, tired from travel, dressed in casual clothes. He wrote about how he tensed up when approaching the front desk, expecting the usual suspicious looks. Instead, he was greeted with a genuine smile and a warm welcome. The owner turned to the new employees, his expression serious but hopeful. "That's what we're really changing, those moments of tension, those expectations of discrimination. We're not just running hotels anymore. We're changing what people expect when they walk through those doors." The training program had expanded beyond just staff. Local police departments had begun sending officers to observe and learn from their new approach to security. Community leaders regularly participated in feedback sessions. Even the architectural team was consulting with diversity experts for upcoming renovations. But the most important change, the owner said, walking the group back through the lobby, is in the conversations we're having. 3 months ago, people in this lobby were recording what they thought would be another viral video of discrimination. Today, they're recording our training sessions to share as examples of positive change. He stopped at the exact spot where he had stood during the confrontation. "Every morning, I stand here for a few minutes," he told the group. "I watch how our guests are greeted, how our staff interacts, how the whole space feels. And every morning, I see something that makes me proud." The front desk manager stepped forward again. "We're not perfect yet," she admitted. "We still make mistakes, but now we learn from them instead of hiding them." The security guard nodded in agreement. "We're not just changing policies," he added. "We're changing hearts and minds, including our own." The owner smiled at his staff, then turned back to the new employees. "That's what you're joining today, not just a hotel chain, but a movement. Every person who walks through those doors is part of our story now, and we're writing a new chapter every single day." 1 year after the incident that changed everything, the Grand Plaza Hotel in Chicago hosted a special event. The lobby was filled with a different kind of energy, one of celebration and reflection. Hotel owners from across the country had gathered to learn about what had become known as the Grand Plaza model. The owner stood at a podium where the confrontation had taken place exactly 1 year ago. Behind him, the wall displayed impressive numbers. Guest satisfaction up by 40%, employee retention increased by 65%, and most importantly, 0 reported incidents of discrimination across all properties in the past 6 months. "A year ago, I stood in this exact spot being treated like a criminal," he began, his voice carrying across the packed lobby. "Today, I stand here as proof that one difficult moment can spark real change." He gestured to the crowd, where his former accusers now sat proudly in the front row. The security guard had been promoted to head of security training, traveling to different properties to implement new protocols. The front desk manager had become the director of guest relations, helping reshape how the entire chain approached customer service. "But this isn't about numbers or titles," the owner continued. "It's about the stories we hear every day." He picked up a thick stack of letters from the podium. These are just from the past month. Letters from guests who tell us they finally feel truly welcome in a luxury hotel. Notes from employees who no longer fear making honest mistakes because they know they'll be taught, not terminated. He shared some of these stories with the audience. There was one about an elderly couple who had been homeless, seeking shelter in the hotel lobby during a storm. Instead of being asked to leave, they were given a room for the night and connected with local social services. Another story told of a young aspiring chef from a tough neighborhood who was now part of their culinary apprenticeship program. We stopped asking, "Do they belong here?" and started asking, "How can we make everyone feel like they belong here?" The owner smiled as he looked around the room. That simple change in perspective has transformed not just our hotels, but our entire approach to hospitality. The changes had rippled far beyond the hotel chain. Other businesses had started adopting their training programs. Local police departments had incorporated their de-escalation techniques into their own training. Even schools were using their story to teach students about bias and judgment. But perhaps the most powerful change, he said, walking away from the podium to stand in the exact spot where he'd been confronted, is what happens here every day. He pointed to the front doors. Every person who walks through those doors now enters a space where they're presumed to belong, where their worth isn't determined by their clothes, their appearance, or their background. He invited the security guard and manager to join him at the front. They stood together, a living testament to how people can grow and change when given the chance. A year ago, these two people made a mistake that could have ended their careers. Instead, they became part of the solution. They turned their shame into purpose, their regret into action. He turned to them with genuine appreciation. They helped build something remarkable. The owner then revealed the hotel chain's newest initiative, a scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in hospitality management. The first class of scholars was seated in the audience, their faces beaming with hope and possibility. "This is how real change happens," he said, gesturing to the young scholars. "Not through punishment or public shaming, but through education, opportunity, and second chances. We're not just running hotels anymore, we're building bridges, opening doors, and changing lives."